Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. The Environmental Management Authority's website states that the Knowledge Management System, or KMS, of Trinidad and Tobago's National Climate Mitigation Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification System design is intended to create a centralized repository for information regarding greenhouse gas emission sources, as well as mitigation efforts and resources or support required to support their reduction. Now we go in depth on the monitoring, reporting, and verification, specifically with Technical Officer 2 Air, Treina Dinoo. Welcome, Treina. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, you are a technical officer to AIR, and so there are different types of monitoring. So give me a little bit before we go into the MRV, thank you, about your job specs and what it is you do in terms of like the way that we can monitor air quality in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, as part of the air unit, our job function ranges from implementing the air pollution rules. So we have source emitter registration of facilities that emit air pollutants, as well as permitting of those facilities. And we also have the National Ambient Air Quality Management System. We have monitors or stations that monitor pollutants or various air pollutants throughout the country. Right now, we have 5 various locations throughout the country.
We hear about air quality sometimes when there's a lot of Sahara dust in the air. Is there anything else that is measured in terms of the ambient air quality?
Well, our ambient air quality monitoring stations, we measure particulate matter, particularly PM10 and PM2, and that is what will give us an idea of the Saharan dust levels in the air, as well as nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, ozone, and those are the main ones that we measure. Those are referred to as the criteria pollutants because they are the main sources of pollutants from human activity, and those are the ones that we focus on in our monitoring stations.
Okay, and I think there was also we also get reports from you when there are like fires at the Beetham landfill as well.
Yes, exactly, because we currently have a monitoring station at the WASA's wastewater Beetham station, so it's downwind from the landfill. So during the recent landfill fire, we were able to capture some data from that event.
All right, thank you so much for that. It's always nice to get that context, but I think this system is a little different from the MRV system. So what are those differences?
Well, the MRV system, maybe I should provide you with a little context. So Trinidad and Tobago ratified the Paris Agreement on Climate Change in 2018. And the aim of the Paris Agreement is to keep global warming to well under 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. And there's an even more ambitious attempt to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So as a party to that convention, Trinidad and Tobago is obligated to communicate information related to its greenhouse gas emissions and removals. So as a country, we have committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in the major emitting sectors, which are industry, transport, and power generation by 15%. So to track these measures implemented to reduce these greenhouse gases. And when we talk about greenhouse gases, we're talking about carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And the principle of measurement, reporting, and verification, or MRV, was introduced. So this is being done in Trinidad and Tobago through a system known as the National Climate Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting and Verification System, or in short, the National MRV system. Now, it's different from the ambient air quality monitoring stations because these stations, the ambient stations, they actually have monitors that would measure the pollutants in the air. But this MRV state, when we talk about monitoring in the national MRV system, we're not actually talking about monitors located throughout the country that would measure carbon dioxide, for example. But the monitoring here is really the collection and analysis and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, which is calculated. So where it's calculations that are done. And we also look at the efforts made to reduce them and the support required. So all of that, the greenhouse gas emissions, the efforts to mitigate them, and the resources support devoted to these efforts is what forms part of the MRV system.
And I keep on hearing about that 1.5 to stay alive. So thank you so much for that overview. And it makes a lot of sense to kind of start plugging in some more information now. But when you talk about those calculations over those three main areas, so the three main areas, I believe, is transportation, energy generation. And what's the next one?
So we have, yes, transport, correct, power generation, and industry. Those are our main emitting sectors for Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, so who is responsible for creating those algorithms or those calculations to say, okay, well, if this is the amount of input that you use, this is the amount of output there by these greenhouse gases that you most likely will have?
Well, the MRV system, it includes a number of templates, and those templates, it ensures that Trinidad and Tobago conducts monitoring, reporting, and verification according to international standards. So, for example, the templates are designed according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. So currently, we use the 2006 guidelines. So all stakeholders or entities in Trinidad and Tobago would be reporting their emissions based on the methods in that guideline, the 2006 guidelines. And that ensures that we are all reporting, all nations are reporting according to the same methodology. And so it can be transparent and also comparable.
But it makes me wonder a little bit though, and I like the fact that you talk about being able to compare, you have templates, you have reference points, but how do we standardize in the sense that do we look at the amount of vehicles that are on the road? How do we get that information? Do we look at the amount of buses that PTSE has? What are some of those factors that go into the equation enabling us to use the templates?
That's a very interesting question. So depending on the sector, there will be different methodologies for each sector. So for example, if we're looking at transport, for example, the system is designed in such a way that there are specific formulas to use. So there are different tiers of calculations. So for example, for tier 1 calculation for transport, we would look at the amount of fuel consumed by the country. So we would look at fuel consumed, and there would be various emission factors that would go into that calculation. However, if we start to get more specific for Trinidad and Tobago, as we get more advanced, we would look at more specific details. So the number of kilometers driven, the different types of vehicles on the road. So for example, if we have light passenger cars, heavy-duty vehicles, and even look at, for example, for passenger cars, if they have catalysts or they don't have catalysts. So the equations could get very complicated, but all countries could even start off with a very simple calculation that could help them to establish a baseline before they reach those advanced levels of calculations.
Thank you very much. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask, because it is two very different realities. Okay, well, possibly you have a car just come out of the dealership, or possibly a hybrid or something, or even a car that is well maintained. You carry it in ever so often and it gets tuned up, versus one that you see it coming from a mile away. One that could actually possibly, if it's in front of one of the ambient air monitors, could, I don't know, trigger it because the way this thing's smoking. So that's one of the reasons I asked the question. So, like, what are some of those factors? And thank you for the answer. So that different gradations, different tiers, different levels of those calculations. But I think this is something that started in 2021. What has the reporting system been like in terms of information thus far from 2021 to now?
Well, the system is currently a voluntary one in the sense that stakeholders submit data voluntarily into the system. And it is expected that hopefully the legal framework will be finalized so that emissions reporting would become mandatory. But currently, the EMA periodically throughout the year would invite stakeholders via letters to become part of this MRV, national MRV system. Those that agree will be given a unique identifier and login credentials to the knowledge management system, which is housed at the EMA. It's these stakeholders are able to access the system through the EMA's website. So they go in and they have their login credentials and they could upload data into that system. When the data is uploaded, the air unit is responsible for reviewing those calculations, liaising with those stakeholders, ensuring that the calculations are correct, sufficient, and meets the methodology before we use it to create the inventory.
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, we take a short break. We are returning. We are talking about the MRV, looking at climate change monitoring, reporting, and verification. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are going in on the climate change monitoring, reporting, and verification system, and we're doing so with Technical Officer 2 Air, Treina Dinoo. And Treina, one of the things I wanted to ask though is I think Trinidad and Tobago is the first in the region doing this. Are there other people who are looking at what it is we're doing, saying, okay, well, possibly we want to start as well? What is that communication like within the region?
Yeah, so this system, this national MRV system, is actually the first of its kind to be created in the Caribbean region. So Trinidad and Tobago is actually leading the race, as it were, when it comes to a formalized system for reporting greenhouse gas emissions. So most countries would, for example, use a consultant to gather this information because reports must be submitted every 2 years and every 4 years. So those are the timeframes in which we need to support these greenhouse gas inventories and additional data under the Paris Agreement. So because of those reports, Trinidad and Tobago ensure that we formalized the system. So that's where the national MRV system came into play, so that stakeholders will be able to submit that information. And then there is a body, the Environmental Management Authority, that could collect this data and archive the data as well, which is very important so that we can compare our emissions over time. So one of the disadvantages of using consultants is that sometimes information is lost, especially if consultants change over time. But with having a body like the Environmental Management Authority house this archive, or the knowledge management system, ensures continuity throughout the years. So even if persons change, the data will be there and we would be able to compare our emissions over time to see how well we're meeting that goal of reducing our emissions by 15%.
And I guess it also makes the entire process a little more nimble, because if you have to go back and say, okay, well, during this month and this year, this amount of fuel was used, so therefore you should have this amount of output, versus another month where there was a marked increase or decrease is a lot, I guess it's easier to pick up on that one time. So you're able to deal with those small increments as opposed to have to crunch a great deal of figures within a small time period, which is what most likely a consultant would do because you don't necessarily have a consultant on that long unless you have them on retainer. But it begs the question though, the responsibility of the EMA, especially when you're looking at stakeholders who are joining on a voluntary basis. So what is the exact responsibility of the EMA with regard to the MRV system?
So at the top of the organizational chart is the MRV coordinating body, which is the ministry responsible for climate change. And currently that's the Ministry of Planning and Development. And one of their roles is to assign roles and responsibilities to various organizations. And they've assigned the Environmental Management Authority to be the host and manager of the knowledge management system. So the knowledge management system could be described as the brain of the MRV system because it's a central repository for the data. So it's where all the data on greenhouse gas emissions, reductions, and support received is contained. And so we're able to track our progress in reducing emissions. So the Environmental Management Authority, as host and manager of the system, compiles the greenhouse gas data, and we also archive it as well. So in terms of the EMA's roles and responsibilities, currently being we voluntarily ask stakeholders to submit data. And what we found is that a number of companies have signed on. They are very interested in the process, and this is very commendable because they realize that eventually legislation will be formalized by legislation, and so it will become mandatory. And so they recognize that if they join now, they will be better prepared for when that system becomes legalized and mandatory. Reporting is expected to be on an annual basis for each stakeholder. And so joining now and becoming part of the knowledge management system enables them to understand the process, work with us as we learn as well. And so we can grow to that point where we have annual reporting that is accurate and easily verifiable.
Are there any other incentives? And I ask that question because it's one thing to say, okay, well, yes, we're getting in gear so that when this is something that is legally binding and is no longer voluntary, we already have the wherewithal and we're already in a groove, as it were. But are there other things in the sense that somebody can, so like a company X can have as one of their slogans or in their advertisement that we are helping, we are tracking our stuff, and because we are concerned about the environment, and therefore we want to have a role to play in reducing that by 1.5. Is that something that is happening already, to your knowledge?
Well, a lot of companies, even though what we found, a lot of companies, especially those in the energy sector, they already have systems in place to track and reduce their greenhouse gas. And this is because on a global basis, that's where everyone is heading. Every company and organization, they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint. They're trying to put in technology to reduce these greenhouse gases. And we find in coordinating with a lot of these companies that they are already on board. We have a lot of buy-in from these companies, and so they can use that as an incentive. A lot of them on their logos would say that they're going green, or they may publicize the efforts that they're making to reduce their greenhouse gases as a facility, and that is very commendable.
And in this last minute that we have, Ms. Dinoo, what would you want to tell someone who has not yet joined on to it? What message would you want to share with them?
Well, I would like them to know that, a lot of companies may shy away because when they first see the calculations or what is required, they may think that they may not have the resources to invest in this system or to become part of the system. But I encourage all companies to once asked to voluntarily join, because the EMA will work along with you to ensure that we build that capacity together. We are currently building our capacity and knowledge base within the EMA, and we will also work with the organizations and stakeholders to ensure that they understand their roles and responsibilities. And by working together, we will be able to achieve that goal of ensuring that we can do a full inventory by 2024.
And with that in mind, we want to thank you for the work that you and the EMA are doing incrementally as we move forward. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.